All right, and welcome to the fourth episode of Single Pane. I'm Josh.
I'm Maya.
To this episode, we're going to be talking about Nix and NixOS and Homelabs stuff. I've been using it for almost 2 years now. Maya has not used it, but has been curious about it.
Tried it once, right? Like I tried it for being able to pre-package operating system type of stuff on the drone project that we discussed last episode.
Okay.
But like very, very rudimentary exposure to it, right? Like everything I was able to do, I did probably 90% in Docker containers as a base. And then
but just hearing about it from everybody, because Nix is one of those things that people like to talk about once they've tried it.
I worked with somebody at my last company that was very much like very heavy in Nix. Actually, the last few companies, I want to say, like two really strong advocates for it and the benefits it espouses.
Yeah. Okay, but before we get into that, how are you doing?
Not too bad. Job search has been really interesting this last week. I've actually been surprised. I had 3 interviews this week.
Nice.
Which a little bit more up pace than I was kind of expecting. I was half expecting life to get kind of be a repeat of last year when I was putting applications out and just not really hearing much back from folks. There's still lots of that, but I feel like I'm hearing back a lot more this year. 3D printer came in, printed my first thing.
Nice. So, I don't think we mentioned in that episode, which 3D printer did you get?
I don't want to do sponsorship type of stuff.
I know. I'm just curious. Okay. You can just tell me offline. I'm just curious. That's a good point.
I wound up going with one that was on sale. Let's put it that way.
Great. Good call. Who knows?
So far, so good.
It's like buy the cheapest version of something, and then if you break that, then buy the best version of something.
No. So I very much went. We'll call it like upper. I don't know, mid-tier-ish kind of deal. So I say mid-tier. I don't know where people really put things. I eyed a Prusa for a really long time. I eyed Bamboo for a really long time. Decided not to go with either of those. Got something closer to like that $500 price point after the sale price. I went with a K1C from Creality just because I wanted the full enclosure. I didn't want like an exposed print bed. I have pets, right? Like if I have animal hair everywhere, it's just going to get in all of the prints. And but yeah, very much printed off a caliper set because I had a few measurements on my search and rescue project I wanted to take and figured it was a great opportunity to kind of go and compare the accuracy. So like I've got, the steel ruler that I was able to compare the millimeter measurements up against just to make sure the print was solid. But no, really, really impressed so far. My brother said it was one that I'm probably going to end up having to tune and fight with over time. But I like the fact that it was a full enclosure and got kind of everything on sale for a decent price.
Nice.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's super fun.
Let's get into Nix.
Yes, I actually 3D printed the thing that's holding the mini PCs on my rack that we're going to be messing with in Nix. So nice. That's a great segue. Let's get into Nix. So before I share my screen and actually show the code and what I've been doing with it, let's just talk about what the heck is Nix. So
I've heard it described as like a package manager. I've heard it described as a packager in a sense, right? Like being able to use it to build and package container images. So like that's my frame of reference for it, right? Is it's very much framed in that context. But then I'm also told it's highly configurable. It's very easy to sit down and plug in and have it do all sorts of things. And so, that's how I found myself in the rabbit hole that I did last year. But I'm curious what you have to offer here.
So there's this great diagram that I wish I had handy. I'll try and find it for the show notes. But for those familiar with the Catholicism Holy Trinity, right? Like the Holy Trinity is all three things, but each thing is not the other things. I don't want to get too much into the religious version of it, but basically Nix is NixOS, Nix is Nix the package manager, and Nix is Nix the language, but none of those things are each other. But NixOS is heavily dependent on Nix, the package manager, which is heavily dependent on Nix, the language. Nix, the language, and Nix, the package manager kind of get combined and let you do a lot of things like you've been hearing about, right? So you can use it as a replacement for Packer for building VMs. That's one of the things I do really heavily in my Homelab is I build Proxmox backup images that I can just deploy that are like ready to go with all the configuration and packages and everything that I need in them, and even secrets. You can use Nix to build like actual packages, right? So you can have for each project, you can have a Nix shell that gives you the dependencies that you need for running a development environment for that project, and it also has the build for that. It works much more. It's really, the tool chain is really oriented around C and C derived languages with a C based like a make based compilation tool chain. So that's really, really well supported. When you get into things like Python and Node.js, it gets a little bit more futzy because you actually end up with like a package manager inside your package manager, or you have to use the Nix way to, like, you have to just give up on the Pythonic or Node.js way to do things and use Nix to manage everything, which you can do, right? Like all of npm packages is in Nix packages.
So just out of curiosity, right? Like, because the other build tools that I'm very much familiar with are like Bazel from Google and whatnot, where that kind of very similar mentality of if you adopted Bazel, you kind of had to forego package JSON or Go mod, right? Like you had to use the Bazel way of managing dependencies, which sounds very, very similar here, right? Like in Nix, you have to kind of forego the requirements TXT file or the package JSON in order to be able to do Nix level dependency management, or is it specifically the tool chain?
You can keep the package manager of the ecosystem that you're working with, and just use Nix for automation and building and like system level dependencies. And I do that sometimes, right? Like sometimes it's easier if you're adopting if you're adopting someone else's project and just trying to work in it. It can be a bit challenging to like create a Nix flake. Flakes is a whole other thing that we'll talk about, that has all of the like runtime level dependencies, but it's certainly convenient. If there are system level dependencies, I will often build a Nix flake for myself, even if I'm not going to share that with other people, just so that I don't have to worry about those system level dependencies.
Okay.
And then for projects that you're working on for yourself, like for my own personal website, which is built using Hugo, I'm just using Nix to install plugins. I'm not using Go mod, although there is a go.mod files that I think, I'm not sure exactly how it works, but it's just sort of magic and it works. That's been easier for me than my old one, which was Ruby.
I gotcha.
And I don't, the nice thing about this is I don't really know Go or Ruby, but like I'm able to work with both through Nix.
I gotcha. Just because you understand the build tool chain, and so if you need to go and like build a project, you're not getting into like, oh, go and what is it, Rails compile this app or something like that, right? Throw back to
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then for a lot of things, so then on top of that package, okay, so a couple things about how the package manager works, right? So reasons why you would want to use it to manage your packages and why it's really cool is because it's an append-only store. So every package that you install gets put into this append-only store and is referenced via symlinks. And all of its dependencies are built independently. So if you have two packages that happen to depend on the exact same version of Python, they'll get a symlink to that same version of Python in your Nix store. But if you need 5 different versions of Python, you can have 5 different versions of Python, and every project can point to the one that it needs.
It's kind of like how PNPM works under the hood as well. Like PNPM does the same kind of shared library full of dependencies and symlinks them out to the different modules, right? Like it's kind of the stepwise improvement over Lerna, JS, and Yarn, where it kind of combines all of that into one tool. Okay, interesting.
So that's sort of like the core of how the Nix package manager works. And then you have these like things called derivations. So basically you write derivations, which are recipes. You write recipes to create a derivation, and that's how you get packages in the Nix packages repo. And then any of those packages can be installed as part of any Nix module. Those modules then get... Oh,
derivation is the package. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, a derivation is usually a package. It could, like if I create a VM, that's also a type of derivation. Right. So it's an artifact basically.
So it could be like an npm module. It could be a Docker container. It could be a virtual machine image. You kind of name it. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
So on top of that package manager, you then have NixOS, which uses it to like fundamentally manage all of your system packages. And then you have Home Manager, which is a really popular tool to use that basically gives you Nix modules for user level packages. So you can have specific homes that have certain packages installed. You can really quickly switch between different homes. And it also has convenient tools for managing your dot files. So basically, most of the programs that you use, like NeoVim, Tmux, Git, what have you, have a home manager module where you can just really quickly set your Nix configuration, and it will create the dot files that you need for that module. And the nice thing about that is then, one, it's kind of a pain to translate your dot files, right? Like if you already have a really robust dot files repo, it took me maybe 6 months to translate everything over. NeoVim was the last thing I did, and that really Nixified it. But you don't have to do everything at once, right? Like you can just point to existing files if you don't want to Nixify them. But then once you do get to like Nixification, everything's in one object tree, which means like I have a configuration for Aerospace and a configuration for Sketchy Bar, which are 2 different macOS like UI apps. And I'm able to share a dictionary between those 2 configuration files so that I only update it in one place and they both get updated.
Okay, so like the equivalent for me is like for my secret management, right? Like I keep everything in one password. So I have kind of similar, forget what they're called, but they're like 1Password references that I can interpolate in effectively. They're like effectively a resource URI, op:// the name of the vault, the name of the item, the name of the attribute within the item. And so that gets interpolated into an environment variable. It sounds like it has similar capabilities there, but now instead of needing to find it in like 3 different env files, it's a little bit more centralized, is my understanding.
Yes, it centralizes all of your configuration for services and programs, right? So services at the system level, if you want to run Grafana or Nginx, you can really simply define your configuration for that without having to dive into the specific configuration markup of that.
Can you still split it out for like security reasons? Like if I'm thinking about it from the perspective of like there's some set of secret variables I don't want shared with some area of the project, like can I still execute a subtree without needing all the configuration variables available to me?
It's the modules are pretty self-contained, so yes, you can. It's pretty portable. If you have a module that's doing a specific thing, to just port that over to another place. And it has like a CSS-like system of overrides. So you can have like a base module that has a bunch of things. Like my base module defines the hard drive disk ID, but then every single VM, right, has a more specific ID that overrides that. And actually, that's not true. I think it's a tag, so that doesn't have to change. But you can override, right? You can override things from the base template.
I think something like that might get a little bit more concrete as we get more into the code and like see some of that in practice.
All right, let's dive in. Let's there we go. Okay, so we have to talk about flakes. Flakes are this feature that's built into Nix. They are marked as.
Can you make it bigger?
Yes. How's that?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. So flakes are built into NixOS and they're marked as unstable. So you have to explicitly turn, depending on how you install Nix, and there are lots of different ways to install Nix, and that's another thing we'll have to get into. Flakes are disabled by default, and you have to explicitly enable them in your system configuration. But they are actually pretty stable. They've been around for a very long time. A lot of things use them, and as far as I can tell, they're the easiest way to work with these. essentially what they do is they lock your inputs. So normally the way that Nix works, like if you're running Nix just on your Mac or on your Linux or Windows machine, right, and you can do that. You don't need to be running Nix OS. You can just use it as a package manager on these other operating systems, which I do. You have this, you basically have a version of Nix packages in your user profile, and anything that you build references that. It's called a Nix channel. Anything that you build references that version of the Nix packages, and when you update it, it affects anything that you would build. Flakes are more reproducible because the inputs are locked to a specific Git hash usually, or something like that. And you can do this without flakes. Like you can lock the inputs without flakes. It's just much more cumbersome to manage them and update them. There's another tool called Neural, I think, NURL, that sort of like gives you the things that flakes give you without having to turn on flakes. But it's a much more cumbersome workflow in my experience. So and most things that you'll find in the Nix ecosystem are published as flakes. So it's just a really easy way to use things that other people are publishing.
Did you say, for clarity, NURL, so November Umbrella, yeah. Roger Lima?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, my guess is Nix URL is probably what it's short for under the hood, which is then just a URI effectively.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And what that does is it basically downloads the tarball and gets the hash of it for you so that you can check the hash on future builds.
I gotcha.
I'm no longer doing this, but I used to like have some remote modules that I was maintaining and referring to. You can even write, like sometimes I will refer back to this repo itself as a module, and that way I can kind of pin a certain host will be pinned to a certain version of my custom modules, and then I can update other VMs without affecting the ones that I don't want to update yet.
Cool.
So this flake has a couple of inputs. NixOS generators is an important one for the VM and Homelab workflow. This is what's letting me build images from Nix configurations. So if you're using NixOS, there's usually, if you just install NixOS out of the box, you end up with two files. One is configuration.nix, and the other one is hardware configuration.nix. The idea is that hardware configuration.nix includes like enabling all of the drivers and specific things for that specific machine hardware. And the configuration.nix would be a little bit more portable and get you things like your users and your services that you want to configure. NixOS generators sort of just generates a VM image or an ISO or whatever from a configuration.nix. And then for all of those, instead of having a hardware configuration, you're referring to a profile. Like there are existing profiles that you can reference, and one of them is for a QEMU guest, which works great for VMs.
So I'm pretty sure this is what I wound up using when I was doing the like little bit of experimentation work back when I was trying to package my ISO.
Yeah.
But
that's highly likely. Yeah. And I think it might be built into Nix now. I think I might not need this. I'm not sure though. I've had this repo's been around for a while. This repo, I built some magic here with the help of some LLMs, because Nix is really hard to read and write. I love it. I love functional languages, and it's really easy for me to think about, but it's hard to read and write. But what this does is it loops over this hosts directory so that I can just, rather than having to like edit this flake file and add each host explicitly, like usually that's what a flake file would look like. If you look at any of like the canonical examples, there would just be a list of hosts in here, and each host would reference the specific configuration that I want. So the flake defines two things. It defines your inputs and your outputs, right? So like each host is basically a build target that I can use with this flake. So I don't have to edit the flake. I just drop a file in here, and then it dynamically grabs the host name, which here I'm setting as a variable for some reason. I don't know why I'm doing that. But yeah, that gets grabbed and it becomes the name of the flake output.
My bet is it's probably a temporary assignment because your import happens after the declaration of.
No, this isn't referenced anywhere outside this file. So It's just convenience for me, but I'm only using it once, so it's just hoisted, I guess.
I gotcha. I gotcha.
So yeah, so this is a Nix module, right? This Nix module happens to be a configuration for a specific VM. Because it's a NixOS module specifically, and Home Manager modules and NixOS modules both work this way, it gets a bunch of inputs magically provided to it by the module system. So those, and we can just kind of choose which of those inputs we need. One of them is all of the, basically, Nix recursively figures out your configuration. So any of the configuration that exists yet is here, and we can reference it from the other modules. And then packages is all of Nix packages in case we want to install some more of them.
That's like that's like exposing the derivations, correct? So like the npm modules, the Docker containers. So, okay.
Yeah. And then we can import these modules. There's another. You can actually like import a Nix file into another Nix file. That's not what this is. This is a NixOS modules thing. So that these imports will get all of these magic inputs, just like this one did. This doesn't do much. I'm pretty sure all this does, if we go look at it, is set my logging to volatile memory, because I don't want to thrash my NVMEs with like 18 VMs running on a single mini PC.
Yep.
Where's templates, server? Yeah. Store just sets journal D. Nix uses journal D out of the box and makes heavy use of systemd. So most of the, like, if you set up services using Nix, they get set up as systemd services. If you set up, you don't have to do it this way, but if you want to, there's a very easy way with Nix to set up Docker containers that are wrapped by systemd services.
Okay.
I do use that, so I'll show that.
What's the name of that? The container OS kind of deal, effectively?
It's,
or like
it's under the virtuals. Yeah, so everything is, when you're configuring NixOS, here, let's, so there's this search, and I think you can also search options. Yeah, NixOS options. So this is all of the, okay. This is all of the options available in NixOS, and I think the Docker one is virtualization. I can't remember if it's spelled British way or the English American way. Ah, okay. Yeah, so there's virtualization.
Zen server. Hello.
Yeah, there's like everything. There's so much. Yeah, OCI containers.
OCI containers. Nice.
And then you have all of these dynamic, like you can basically just define the name of the variable of the service, and then it has all of these options. This more or less maps to the options for a Docker run or Docker compose.
Yeah, kind of like a Docker compose YAML file, effectively.
Yeah. But because it's part of the same object tree as everything else, you can do things like, if you have a Docker container running Prometheus, configure your scrapers based on the ports that were exposed in your other hosts.
Kind of like the Terraform way of like being able to reference the outputs of modules that were executed and pull values from things dynamically. I like that.
Exactly.
It's nice. Yeah, right now I do a lot of like manual hand configuration for a lot of that, and it's not great. Like I've definitely fat fingered a container definition somewhere once or twice. So
yeah. And because this relies so heavily on systemd, and like I hate writing systemd scripts, but Claude is great at it. So I'm just like, hey, do this thing, and then it's a thing that I can test like idempotently and also reproducibly, and I don't have to rely on just LLM sketchery. I get like reproducible LLM sketchery, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, enough sense.
And then so we have two different active channels right now. One is like the current stable channel, 25.05. These usually come out twice a year. So the next one will be in November. And then unstable, which is just master, right? Main, the latest everything. This is,
I like
and
the
you can
calendar version semantic from Ubuntu and and whatnot. It's just much more predictable, especially when you're kind of rolling forward.
Yeah, and it's much easier to just know, oh, okay, that's very out of date or relatively not. I think I'm still running 24.05 in most places because I'm lazy. And I don't need any of the newest packages, but you can also mix and match. So in cases where even though I'm running 24.05, if I need a newer package, I can just grab it out of the newer Nix packages or the unstable. I don't tend to do that on my servers. I don't need it. But I do tend to do that on my workstations because there's stuff like the latest version of Claude that I want to make sure that I have.
Yeah. I think the latest one for me has always been Olama because I run kind of a server instance on my remote machine, and then that one, in order to get access to like newer models, you have to run the latest version of it constantly.
Yeah, and I have a few like NixOS desktop workstations that are more like thin clients than workstations. But one thing I've learned is not to use NixOS for managing things like my browser. Like it has a robust home manager module for Firefox. But things like anything like that has like all these network connections and frequent security updates, like more than once a week, just let it update itself, install it through Flatpak or something else where it can update itself. And like Slack is the same thing. So Slack, Firefox, Discord, these things I don't install through Nix anymore. Or Homebrew. I just let them, I install them the regular way and let them update themselves.
I gotcha.
Okay. So
let's put some of this, like, I don't know, let's put some of the pedal to the metal on this, right? Like,
all right, do you want to install Nix? Let's get you installing Nix.
Well, I can at least like get the command going. I tried brew searching it. It didn't show up, so
it's not kind of like you can install brew with Nix, but not the other way around.
So I can get started on that, but I'm curious because like I want to see a little bit more of like for reference, my setup is very much a hodgepodge of Docker Compose and like PNPM for being able to do kind of multi-repo orchestration type of stuff, or not even multi-repo orchestration, but like multi-modules within a repo orchestration. I've long looked at kind of the way I do things today and figured Nix is probably a much better way to do this, especially when it comes to things like my home lab setup. And would love to migrate to that. And I think where I end up with a lot of gray areas when it actually comes to like, okay, I've got Docker Compose files. How do I kind of start to look at translating those into Nix? And then like, even if it's just starting with the simplicity of like, here's how you run a container, right? Like here's how you kind of work backward from a container to this is the host it's running on. This is how you provide all the necessary configuration and credentials, and then kind of go from there.
Okay, so let's start with the host because it's actually not that bad. So this is my base template that basically all of my VMs use. I have a different base template that I use for like non-VM direct installs, and I'm also not sure if I use this template for my VM workstations. I can't remember. But so we're setting a host name that is easily overridable because we're using the make default function, and right lib is another one of those things that we can just magically get out of the inputs. Modules path is another thing we can magically grab. This points to a specific directory within the Nix packages repository. So if you want to like just go find Nix packages on GitHub and go to, I think the directory is just called modules. That's what this points to for the specific Nix packages that you have provided here as an input. So within that directory, there's all these profiles. One of them is QEMU guest. This sets up all of our hardware drivers, right? All of our VHCI and all that stuff, all those virtual drivers that you need for a VM, all get set up and installs the QEMU guest agent, which you also have to enable, but it's a single command to just enable it. That's great. This then allows Proxmox to talk to the host and show things like its IP address in the console. And when you run a shutdown command, it can do it safely instead of having to do a hard shutdown. NixOS out of the box comes with a bootloader that lets you load past configurations. So anytime you create a new configuration, it just creates a new entry in the bootloader And if you want to roll back, it's as simple as rebooting and choosing a previous configuration.
I gotcha.
One thing to note about that is that it does not actually back up or change the configuration.nix file. So your system will get restored to the state it was in, but your configuration.nix file will not, which is why it's important to keep that committed to Git and like, version control that before you update your system.
So when I'm installing this, right, am I installing NixOS or am I installing Nix, the package manager?
That's up to you and what you're trying to do. The easiest,
okay,
I would start with installing Nix, the package manager, because then you can build VM images, which is a really easy way to use NixOS. But if you also just like have a mini PC that you want to install NixOS on, that's another great way to get started with it.
There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go with the package manager for now. The OS seems like a promising way to go for like if I'm putting this in a Docker container or if I'm throwing it somewhere else and kind of going from there. But
yeah, I'll show you how I run Docker containers in the OS.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't we get to that? So yeah, this is the base VM setup. It's pretty straightforward. I have a blog post about this. Docker containers look like this. Is this one? Yes. So enable Docker, turn off pod, make sure podman's off in case I had some other module that enabled it. Tell OCI containers to use Docker as its backend, and then create a container. So the container name, the container and service name will be InfluxDB. The image, the ports, right? It looks like Docker Compose. This one's not complicated. I don't have any variables or anything.
So is that the container? Is that the container name or is that the service name in Docker?
It ends up being both. So you end up with a systemd service called docker-influxdb, and you end up with a container called influxdb.
So like when I'm thinking about my Docker Compose file, right? Because like I don't necessarily, I haven't looked at how it handles systemd under the hood, if at all.
It likely doesn't.
I didn't think so. Where I'm at is, right, like my services are quite often getting addressed as like metrics ClickHouse or metrics collector, right? And like those are the names of the services within the Docker Compose file. And like that gets, the container name doesn't end up being one for one there because they do support like horizontally scaling of like multiple replicas, right? So am I understanding this correctly that this actually wouldn't necessarily do multiple replicas, or would I have to do that like actually explicitly here?
You'd have to give each one its own name.
Okay.
Yeah. I think. Does Docker Compose have like a replica count thing? I've never used that. If it does.
Yeah, it came from the days of Swarm, way back when. So if you look back at like, early days of Swarm when it was multi-node and being able to address services, it all started at Docker Compose, and Docker Compose kind of became this nice way of configuring and linking multiple services together within a single file. And so I tend to use Docker Compose quite a lot just because it's got a lot of robust features in it. I think these days it's like
supports a replica option. Although it does let you just pass, it lets you just pass extra arguments. So maybe it doesn't let me search this way. That's the problem. It's not letting me search this way. So maybe just support like this.
Yeah, so there's like deploy mode replicated. No. This was 2023. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's more of a compose semantic and less of a like actual specific container semantic. So it seems like what I'm kind of gathering here, right, is like when I'm looking at this Nix module, right, call it a pod or whatnot, like this is the network's namespace that things are at least deployed and connected together within. And I can define multiple containers here that might all like link together. So if I had like a metrics.nix package where like then I had the collector in there, I had my database in there, I had my UI in there, my chat agent, whatever, right? Like those components. that would kind of be confined in a single Nix instance. But then if I wanted to do multi-instances, I think there's a little bit more research to be done here.
Yes.
I would also figure, like, I'm surprised that like even Nix doesn't have like a Docker Compose kind of capability.
I mean, you can't. It's Docker's installed. If you just have this line 4 or 5, if you have this on your NixOS VM, you can just use Docker. I think you still have to install the Docker Compose package. You don't get it with this, but you have Docker, the Docker daemon, and then if you install the Docker Compose package, you can use it normally.
I gotcha.
The only thing you can't really do with NixOS is run binaries that weren't built as Nix derivations. You can, well, you do have Flatpaks, but like you can't just like download a binary and run it. It's pretty much the only limitation.
I guess that kind of makes sense, right? Like if they're approaching it from like kind of a security perspective, better to have a tool chain that deals with it properly, and that rather than lets you do the wrong thing, right?
Right.
The wrong thing. Let's be honest, if you're checking your signatures, you're probably okay.
So these are, I built like one of these, and then Claude built the rest of them. And with most of them, it got like 1 or 2 things wrong. Like I had to tell it to remember to not use the same ports for different services because it wanted to just use whatever port it found in the documentation, which was like 3,000 for everything.
You're also
and it still needs reminders mapping of that. Yeah, it'll do like some amazing magic, and then the next command or the next query that I run or whatever chat I enter, it will forget which folder it's in and start like editing files trying to fix an error that it got because it was in the wrong folder. So it's fun. But like this is one that I made after episode 1, I think, or episode 1 when we were talking about like pipelines and ingestion. And
fresh RSS and things like that.
I was like, oh, I want to try out fresh RSS. Let's make a module for it. So here's my module, right? And I have this like helper module that I defined called OCI helpers that's also being provided. And so this is a little more complicated because you can see we're defining a bunch of options. So these basically create new, right? Like we were searching all of the options that were available in NixOS out of the box. This module being imported now exposes these options. And unlike the other module just, if you imported it, it was just going to enable InfluxDB. It was just going to do everything because there were no flags or variables or anything. This module
just makes so you actually can toggle it on.
Right. This module doesn't do anything when you import it. You have to enable it.
I gotcha.
And then it has an option for the port with a default, right? And then these functions are just built into Nix modules, and they make it really easy to define these options. Like make enable option just to, like creates a true false option that defaults to false. Within it, then like the comments basically and create the documentation.
Is types a magic keyword?
Yes, it is.
Oh no. Yeah. So import lib, make option, types, make if, and make enabled option. I gotcha.
Yep.
Or make enable option.
I think make derivation might be one. It's sometimes confusing because there are these built-ins and then they're also part of lib, and it's not. Then they behave slightly differently. It's fun. But it's been around for like 20 years, so you expect things like that. So I have this variable data path that I have very clear instructions for all of my containers. I want one path for data, which is anything that's like a database or SQLite or anything like that. Another path for configuration, which is like anything that's like human readable configuration files, JSON, YAML, etc. That's fairly static. And then another path for actual media files, so that I can have like different. Right now, I don't have any different backup or storage tiers for those, but I'd like to be able to. So those are just sort of how I separate the data for each module.
You have your own etc, your own data, and you have your own var.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I had been messing around with having backup built into every single one of these modules. I don't like the way that I've done this. Honestly, I don't like the way that I've done all of these modules. I think it was good to get to this point. But now what I need to do is make a function to generate these because they're so similar. and then I could generate these more easily. And then things like backup, I could build in one place and just import it. But yeah, this uses RESTIC, and it basically just the idea was to expose the paths that are configured to RESTIC so that they can be backed up. But yeah, so you can define all of these options and then use them in your configuration. So you can reference your own options as well as ones that were set by other modules.
And that's a label. Do you find people, like, out of curiosity, right? Because like for me, reading this feels very verbose. I kind of get to some extent like the benefits to having something that's a little bit more verbose at times. What are some of the, I guess, like kind of common complaints that you hear when looking at some of the files? Just trying to understand like where the pain points come in.
I mean, like just like on Reddit and such, you'll see people who want to play with NixOS who are not developers, and that's I think a mistake. Like it's very, very much an operating system and a tool for developers. You have to have a basic understanding of how functional languages work. Mm-hmm. I think for me, it's really opaque, right? Like a big unlock was just understanding how this Nix module system works and how it recursively merges the modules. It's very, very complex, and it was like, it's a weird comparison, but I actually compare it to CSS because it has like, it's very declarative and it has all of these complex rules for merging. And you kind of have to learn that, how that all works. And then it has this kind of like weird syntax, right? Where you just like, you define all of your variables at the beginning and then you write all of your code, and like all of your arguments are just like, they're not wrapped in parentheses or anything. They're just there. And I think that's just foreign to people who are used to more C-like syntax.
Just like more, I would say like non-configuration specific syntax even, right? Like some of this element, some of these like feel very similar to the way things like the Terraform HCL looked. Yes. Some of it, right? Like where it's like you get a little bit of that interpretation layer where you can generate portions or like have some dynamic blocks and things like that. Whereas like you're not necessarily working with like a statically defined language, like or statically defined config like YAML or JSON.
Yeah. So I think that's, and then the other challenge is that the documentation is a little bit fractured. So like there's like multiple versions of the documentation available. There's a non-canonical wiki, there's a canonical wiki. It's all at various phases of up to date. Of course, all of this is mostly done by volunteers. And because it's kind of magic, kind of opaque, and the documentation is completely fractured, it makes it hard for beginners. But now that I'm not a beginner, if I had to deal with this, or if I had to deal with Helm like Go templates, I would much rather deal with this.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Go templates. Like there's time and place for them. My big challenge is always working with like the double nested brackets and things like that.
Yeah.
I did learn you can actually configure that on the Go side of the world. So you can change like your bracketing symbols that they look for.
I don't need to know that there are different ways to do it. That just
makes it worse.
There are a lot of ways to do things in Nix. It's fun. It's actually, but one of the things I love about the Nix community is there's this tradition of just publishing your Nix configurations. So for anyone who's running like Nix for their workstation, they just publish it as I do. It's very broken and messy, and I'm not proud of it. And like my machine is broken right now, and I can't brew update anything. But it's all shared, so you can like check out how my dot files get made. And it's all mostly broken out into these modules that have not been parameterized, but that some of my other list of things that I'd like to update is parameterizing them.
So you talked about like using a little bit of AI in here to go through and like do some more development on some further resources and whatnot, right? Like you wrote a handful of them by hand, and then you were able to say like, hey, like Claude, help me out here. I want to add, this kind of capability. What does that look like?
Yeah, so the workflow was basically that I had one example. I gave it that one as an example. There is a Nix MCP, which is made by a friend of mine.
I just pulled it up.
Yes, I don't have that enabled. I should. It would make this easier. But I have to like explicitly tell Claude, like, hey, go check the docs. But it didn't need too much information about Nix because I had the example already with all of the features of Nix that I wanted it to use. And then I had to, the first time I tried it, it just like made shit up. It was like, here's a Docker Compose file that has nothing to do with what the environment variables and options that the image actually expects. And maybe just a hallucinated version too. So I had to explicitly tell it like, hey, go check GitHub for the Docker Compose file for this project and check the options and then translate them into Nix based on this example. And once it had those two things as part of its input instructions, it was pretty good. And it would sometimes get lost if like the context window was getting too big, and it would sometimes do things like clobber ports. But it was mostly pretty good. And the other cool thing is that it was able to like in real time, because I have all of these Nix hosts like available over SSH, it could, like when I'm creating these new modules, it would actually log into the remote host and check the journals for the errors.
Like diff logs effectively.
Yes. And so it'd be like, oh, this is what's wrong. And so I didn't have to tell it to fix the ports. I was just like, it's not working, fix it. And it was like, oh, I used the same port that Grafana is using. I have to fix that.
I gotcha.
Which was I was impressed by that workflow.
I mean, some of that can kind of come from the current context too, right? Like if you're looking at your Nix files, like it could see port 3000 was mapped twice.
And it wouldn't reread them, right? So if I was starting a new module in a new Claude session, it wouldn't go back and read all of the modules unless I explicitly told it to read a certain one. Because it's like trying to be conservative about how many tokens it used by reading files. And it was also sometimes it would like forget where the files are. So that was some stuff that I put in the Claude.markdown because I have Nix server, like I have Nix modules, I have Nix hosts, and I have Ansible playbooks sort of like all in one repo. So I had to sort of like put in Claude's instructions where everything is so that it wouldn't keep getting lost so often. And it still gets lost, but it gets lost a lot less often with that. Oh wow, we don't have much time left. Should we try and do something with Claude? Should we try and make another module?
I kind of want to stay off of Claude code for it. Right, we got 5 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting seeing some of this from my perspective, right? Because a lot of it stems from, I don't know, call it just being like stuck in my tools and not necessarily wanting to branch out too often. Part of it also comes from like, my attitude is very much use what makes you the most effective. And this has been like a rather effective means for me to be able to manage a lot of like my my internal infrastructure, as well as not introducing too many tools beyond it. Because I quite often find myself like, I need PNPM anyways for being able to do multiple front-end based projects, right? If I have a mobile app and then a separate desktop app, then I end up with 2 front-end modules I want to manage with PNPM. So I try not to like add too much fuel to the fire, if you will. Just my experience with like new developers onboarding, the more tools you throw at them, the more glossed over their eyes get at any organization and at any level, any skill level. So at any skill level, honestly. But this seems like it seems really interesting for certain applications from kind of like the actual like operating system and packaging perspective. Still not 100% sold on like the Homelab setup, but I could see how it certainly makes some of it much easier from my side of the world.
So you asked about how you could apply this every day when we were speaking offline, and I didn't mention that at all. So besides all of this stuff that's in my Nix configuration repo, which is for my workstations, and my Homelab repo, which is for my VMs, the other tool that I use a lot is DevBox. So this has mostly replaced like Docker Compose for me as development, right? Like my instinct to just go install Docker Compose because someone else has Node.js, I'm afraid to install 2 different versions of Node.js on my system is like, it's gone because I just use Nix to manage that. And the specific Nix tool that I use to do that is called DevBox. There's another similar tool called Flux. I've used that one as well. They both work almost identically, except that DevBox uses JSON for configuration and Flux uses TOML. But they basically allow you to really, really easily define your Nix packages and like startup scripts and things for the shell, right? Like they just provide a bunch of convenience hooks on top of Nix essentially. And they also both provide an imperative interface. So like npm install, which Nix does not have out of the box, or it does, but like don't use Nix and install, the one that comes with Nix out of the box. Just do not use that. Pretend it doesn't exist. So this lets you do, like in a project, you can go devbox init, devbox install, make, and then you have make. I don't know why you wouldn't have that on your system, but yeah.
I think you have to install it on OS X. I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm sure if you do, I'm sure it's part of my system-wide Nix packages. But yeah, whatever you need for that specific project, you can install with DevBox, like a specific version of Python.
There was something I came across recently that I was like, why is it make install? Maybe it was like the default installation of Ubuntu or something like that. And I just got caught off guard.
Using make to install so weird. OS. Some people like their tools, right? It's when you got a hammer.
No. That's not what I was saying. It was just more of like make didn't come installed by default. So I had to install it. I remember that.
Yes.
So one thing I wanted to actually dive into a little bit more. Where did my notes go? Like with the last few minutes that we have left.
Yeah.
And we talked about, making it more practical for like everyday use. We talked a little bit about the different components. You said Flake, or you said DevBox and Flux for like more
Flux,
like
local development, distinct from the
Kubernetes
Flux project. Yeah.
The GitOps controller. From formerly Weaveworks, wherever that is these days. Great group of folks. I enjoyed working with them quite a bit. Gosh, where was my question going to land?
Well, while you're thinking of it, DevBox integrates with Duran, which is another fun tool. So basically, whenever I'm starting a new project now, DevBox init, I forget what the DevBox command is it has like a DevBox generate Duran command. I think that's it, DevBox generate Duran. And then when you cd into that project, you're in your DevBox shell.
I gotcha.
And then I add other things to that Duran, like my Kubernetes config environment variables.
Maybe that's a good quick question. I don't think we have enough time for it with like 5 or 6 minutes up here.
We can go over.
I sort of can. So it seems like a great tool to get added to your toolbox. Where do you recommend people start with this?
Ooh, that's a good question. It depends what problems you're trying to solve. So I started with using it to build VMs, which was not a great entry point because it was like I had to sort of learn 3 layers of the tool chain to get to the outcome that I wanted, and I struggled a little bit with that. I think starting with something like DevBox is a really, really nice entry point because it's really easy to use. There's great documentation for it, and it's going to immediately improve your workflow for specific projects without affecting how you do anything else. So you don't have to adopt. You can adopt it as you like, project by project. So I think that's a great one. I think Home Manager is fun if you're the sort of person who like really loves playing with dot files. Like check out Home Manager. Don't try and convert all your dot files all at once, but maybe check it out and see if it's something you want to start migrating to as you adopt new services. And it kind of, for me, it's a really great demonstration of just the power of shared Nix object trees that I didn't expect. NixOS is great if you want a machine that just does a thing. Whether it's a VM or a client, right? But if you want a machine that just does a thing reliably and you never have to touch it, and you want to like turn on 1 or 2 or 6 services on that machine and they just run, it's my go-to tool for that now. Like if I'm like, I want a machine that has Steam and a web browser, NixOS. I want a machine that has Grafana and Prometheus, NixOS.
I gotcha. Okay. I thought of my other question. So you
Okay.
talked about one case on like the dependency management side of the world that I think everybody's all too familiar with, which is go download this command or binary with curl, install it in, user lib, whatever, user lib bin, granted execution access and go, right? Like very canonical use case. How do you address something like that in kind of the Nix ecosystem where like I maybe I'm a small startup that has an internal binary I want to distribute. Maybe there's like some bits there where it's like I want to just get it out and get it going to get some feedback on, and so I'm not ready to kind of buy into the full like publish it, sign it, code security, yada yada yada. Like I plan on doing some of that, but maybe internally I don't have the means to do that. Maybe internally we trust, we talk about layers of trust within the ecosystem. Maybe like somebody internally at my company provided a binary that I wanted to then install into this command line. I actually think it happened at my last job. How do I deal with kind of like the, you can't download this with curl kind of side of the world?
So for anything that you just want to use, you can make a derivation. And you can provide that, you can offer that to people just through a GitHub repo or through a like Rate, which can be in the form of a flake that they can run a single command and they get it. They don't, and you can also get it merged into Nix packages pretty easily, right? So I think part of the reason Nix packages has, so someone can correct me, but I believe it has more packages than any other like reviewed Linux package repository. So Arch packages has more packages, but they're not reviewed. Just sort of like anyone can throw anything in there. Nix packages are reviewed, but it has tens of thousands of packages.
Can I run my like own internal Nix packages effectively?
Yep. You can absolutely have multiple copies of Nix packages and make. It's very common for people to make overlays. So I have a few overlays that basically just add defaults to built-in Nix packages and services that I want to use.
Okay.
But yeah, you can make overlays that completely change the inputs of a derivation or something like that.
Cool. That's all the questions that I kind of had leaning on that.
Okay.
That was the one that I was like drew a blank on for a minute.
Yeah. No, it's just,
I did notice
the Nix way is like make it so easy that you can just do it, and it is mostly so easy that you can just do it.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
The last thing I did notice was we kind of hopped right into it. I never got a chance. How was your week? You doing well this week as well?
Oh yes, I had some minor in scope but major in impact victories on GitHub Actions and Helm packaging. Yes, the lesson for me for this week is that testing something that's idempotent iteratively is a challenge.
Yep.
Nix is great for there's so few times where Nix has trapped me. It's happened a couple of cases where like data has gotten written in a certain way or state has gotten written in a certain way that has gotten me screwed up. But it's like maybe twice in the year and a half that I've been using Nix.
Okay.
It's so much less than with other tools.
I like that.
Yeah. Next week, what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about the 12-factor app, right?
Well, next week's kind of got an interesting curveball to it, right? Like next week, we moved our session initially from Friday up to Monday. So we're doing it Monday, like midday instead of Friday, like last week or like this week. Yeah. And yeah, we're talking about kind of like, I don't know, I think we're just calling it like modern 12-factor considerations effectively. I was hoping to have a blog post for this by the time I got back around to it.
Well, if you don't write anything, we can look at the post from Heroku because I think they had a pretty in-depth one.
Oh, yeah.
Updating. They were like updating the 12-factor post from, is it like 13 years ago? More than that? 15 years ago?
Oh, it's been like, it's been forever. I think 13 was when I first came across it. So at least 12 years. Yeah.
So yeah, they updated it, I think last year, basically for the cloud native world. And we can take a look at their update.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things I think like modern AI considerations should be forefront of mind, at least when we think about how agents are starting to take a role in the code contribution process. There's things that we probably want to consider a little bit more. There's also, I don't know, there's a lot of things that I think have changed, like our understanding of like the way people approach logs and metrics and traces are all different. I think a lot of behaviors there kind of get really interesting to dive into in terms of how it impacts.
Oh, you've reminded me of an important point to make about the Nix Homelab situation. So it doesn't often read all of those files, but I think you tried to make this point. It does have all of the context for all of the configuration of all of my VMs. So if I'm working on one VM and it needs to know something about what's running in another VM, it doesn't have to go connect to that VM. It can just look at the configuration, and it'll do a little bit of both. The most impressive thing I saw it do was just running raw curl commands against the OTel collector I was running to diagnose InfluxDB version compatibility.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah. Anyways, sorry. Had to throw in that AI thing since we were talking about, yes, the impacts of AI on 12-factor. And I think it does. A lot of it is about like making sure it has the right context, which means having things like Nix that are really condensed context windows for humans and AIs to share.
Well, Nix does a good job of kind of bridging that context with deployment and, or not even necessarily deployment, but context and packaging or config and packaging, right? And then that's like one element of it. I talked a lot to a few like former coworkers about like my thoughts and opinions on why it's important to document and capture technical decisions in your repo, right? Like when I talk about like, why did we choose a relational database over like a document database? Useful design decision to capture. And it's okay if the document or the decision is, we understood it better, or, whatever the answer is, like, I think it's fine, whatever you put down, but it's important to capture the rationale and the decision-making process ahead of time, because when you find yourself, 3 years down the line, you're starting to bring in senior talent, they're all going to have those same answers, right? Like, I see that you're using a relational database for very document-oriented information. Why did we decide to do that instead of using something like Mongo?
And now we have so much more superpowered search at everyone's fingertips that information doesn't become buried, right? As long as you write it down somewhere, it can be exposed and made accessible.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. I want to say thanks to everyone who stopped by today. I was keeping an eye on some of the chat and whatnot. I saw a few folks stop in for a good portion of time. So thanks to everyone who popped in. And Josh, let's send it off.
Yes. See you all next week. Cheers.
Ciao.